Welcome to the very first episode of the Revving Up podcast from RevEng Consulting. I'm your host, Matt Haller, and I am joined by my co-host and partner in crime, Quang Do. Quang, welcome to Revving Up.
Thank you.
There's a lot of different B2B podcasts and sales podcasts, revenue growth podcasts out there. I guess the question is, why are we doing this one? Why should people listen to Revving Up?
Great question. It's because we're going to provide an insider's unfiltered perspective on the latest and greatest things, all things revenue growth and go to market. As our first couple of episodes will show you, it's a perspective that I think far and few get. And we're excited to bring that and have a no BS conversation about what others can do in this situation and position.
When I think about some of the best content that I've seen about B2B, about sales, I think about the team from like 30 Minutes to President's Club, where anybody can tell you that you need to do better discovery on an intro call with a prospect. But telling people how specifically they can do that better, the specific tactics, and hearing stories from folks on where they went wrong and how they fixed it, that's what I feel like resonates the most today. And if we want to talk about what it takes to build a high-performing revenue engine or a high-performing revenue team, we need to talk about the realities of what it takes to do that, right? And it's not always going to be rosy. It's not always going to be rainbows and butterflies. But by offering that tactical, just in the ground level view, I think we're able to share more authentic view of what this business is like.
Exactly. You hit on the key words, Matt. Authentic, ground level view, what works, what doesn't work, and what you can probably only get from a one-on-one conversation like this.
We have a ton of exciting guests lined up from across the growth spectrum for the season. We've got some chief revenue officers. We have heads of compensation. We're even talking to some commission analysts as well, so that we can say, here's what it looks like from the top of the pyramid. Here's what it looks like from the middle of the pyramid. Here's what it looks like at the ground level, and take that 360-degree view. So we'll see what this ride looks like, but we're excited. I'm excited that you're here. I'm excited that we're going to partner with a couple of phenomenal guests for the show and where this takes us.
Awesome.
So with that, let's take a quick break and we're going to jump into our first discussion with our first guest. Donald Tucker is the head of corporate development and investments at Dropbox. He's also held multiple positions as a board observer for companies like Gainsight, Gong, and Luna Health. Donald, welcome to Revving Up.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be on the inaugural liftoff here.
Awesome.
The first question that we ask everybody on the podcast is, how did you end up where you are today? Can you take us through your career journey and how you kind of fell into this role? Because I don't think that anybody woke up or wrote on there, what I want to be when I grow up in kindergarten was head of corporate developments and investments at Dropbox.
They should. It's a great job. No, it's true. I don't think that too many kindergartners are listing that out today as an occupation they want to do. Actually, Quang and I have known each other for a while. So we're both Cal Poly Mustang grads, go Mustangs. We both came up through finance and accounting originally. And so the first job I had out of undergrad was working for oil and gas company, Chevron, and I did accounting. And accounting was great. It was a fine job, but like end of the day, I wanted to do something where I felt like I could make an impact. And that's always what drove me. And, you can be the best accountant. I think, Quang, you can echo this, but what does that mean? My numbers are, to the penny as much as anybody else's, or I did this slightly faster than anybody else. Well, what business impact does that make? It doesn't really make a business impact, right? It's kind of a necessary function. You're a cog in the wheel. And so I always felt frustrated by that. I don't know, Quang, did you have a similar impression when you were in those roles?
Yeah. You feel like you're doing your job, but then you ask yourself, am I truly moving the needle? Am I truly impacting? And I think it's even more amplified at a place like Chevron, where you're one of 55,000 employees in a company at that time was like Fortune 3, if I'm not mistaken, when we were both employed there. And so, and I think to parlay that, I remember, you might not remember this, but I remember when you just graduated from Wharton and you were working in private equity, and you gave me this call and we were catching up and you were telling me about how you were at this mine, I think in Chile or something. They're like, I'm making this investment in this mine. And I just thought to myself, and at this point, I was still debating if I wanted to go back to school. I was like, man, that sounds way cool. Like, that sounds very impactful, right? And so, yeah, it's super interesting. And I agree. I agree with everything you said. Accounting's great, finance is great, certainly necessary, certainly value add, but what you're doing is pretty compelling and pretty cool.
I don't mean to
And
put down people in those roles by any means, right? But kind of telling the story of like what drives you. Well, it's like I want to make an impact, right? And so very much like if you looked at the folks who were decision makers at Chevron, they all had MBAs at that point, at least in the finance org. And so it was, well, let's go get an MBA and see what kind of doors that opens. And so I went back, and that's always kind of a rough. You're doing well in your career. You're sitting there like, do I really want to go 2 years without a salary and all of that? But, the experience is great. I know you went through it. It's a fantastic time, right? You kind of get to peel back, be young again, enjoy yourself. You do a lot of hard work, but you learn a lot at the same time. You grow your network, and it opens you up to a lot of opportunities. And so coming out of there, as Quang alluded to, I went into a job in private equity investing money. One of the most interesting jobs, we went to Africa. We went to like Ethiopia, South Africa. We went to Canada, went to the Amazon, which I don't know why anyone would think they could build a mine next to the Amazon. But anyway.
You flew first class on United the whole way, right?
Yeah, I wish. You get to these remote parts, good luck. You're flying in on like helicopter or those little planes. I don't even know what they're called. That they land on like water or just like strips of dirt. When we came into Arctic Canada, we literally landed on a strip of dirt. And I was like, there's not enough room here. And the pilot just started going down. And I was like, this is how it all... And we came in and,
And there must have been a moment there, too, where you're like, what am I doing? What job is this? How am I getting paid to do this right now?
Oh, yeah. And there's more caribou up there than there are people, and mosquitoes that chase those caribou around. But no, I mean, that was like an amazing job. And, it was a job where you're investing in an asset. You get that feedback. You can see the impact that you're making. It's like, hey, does this mine get built? Is it a profitable mine? Are people getting employed? Are we actually making an impact in the world? And so I really enjoyed that. Did that for 3 or 4 years. And then both from kind of a personal life standpoint, as well as just looking at the natural resource space and saying, okay, is this where I want to spend the bulk of my career? And if you look at natural resources, Quang will know this well, they have long cycles. And so it had been a long bull market, and what comes after that is a long bear market. And so I said, I don't want to be in the prime of my career in a bear market job. And so let's make a switch to something more dynamic. And so my wife and I, at that time, we had our first child. It was time to move. We wanted to go back home to the San Francisco Bay Area. And so it was like, okay, well, everything there is tech. That's the future. How do I make that jump? And so I went in.
Oh, did you?
Well, you go in and it's like, hey, I know natural resources want to hire me to tech. And they're like, have you heard of the cloud? Have you heard of all these things? And, I kind of shrugged my shoulders. And so it was a bit of a process. I eventually landed at an investment bank doing equity research. And so I found someone who said, hey, I can teach you tech. You kind of understand markets. That's harder to teach to me than teaching tech. And so it was kind of a perfect marriage. I did that for a year, covered stocks like Cisco and kind of the networking space. That again felt a little bit like being the cog in the wheel. And, you put out, you're one of, take Cisco as an example. You're one of like 20 analysts covering Cisco. Here's the same news. They generally write the same things, and it goes out into the ether. And unless you write something really controversial, you're not necessarily, creating value. And so again, I got a little frustrated there, but it got me into tech. And so I said, okay, time to jump into like a real tech company and see how that works. And so I went over to a company called Responsus, which was B2C marketing automation platform. So one of the early SaaS platforms, and this was probably about 2013. I did that for a short period because Oracle came and bought us about 3 months later. So it was short-lived, but it was a valuable experience for me. And I'll get to kind of getting into corporate development. I got to see kind of sit through an acquisition. And so what corporate development is, for folks that don't know, it's really leading the M&A function at an organization. And so having gone through an acquisition, seeing how Oracle did that, the impact it made on the org was really insightful because Oracle has a certain reputation. They come in, they pound their chest. We're the best. We're going to outcompete everybody. And it really took a lot of the air out of the room, in that. And so it's like really important, I think, how you show up. And so that's something that always stuck with me in my job. And so when I went out looking for the next job, I used to cover Cisco, and Cisco had an opening in corp dev. And I said, okay, well, let's go do this. I really like the idea of being able to buy companies that's a real needle mover, right? Either you can create a lot of value or you can destroy a lot of value. Like think of like HPE autonomy, right? As an example of destroying value. But it's a way to really make an impact. And so for me, like that, I've kind of always been seeking that. And then what the great thing that came along with that job as well is for a lot of these corporate development departments, you're constantly seeking innovation from the outside in. And so you can get stuck, I think, in your own four walls of like, okay, here's our worldview, here's what it looks like. You miss everything that's happening outside. And so as a corporate development person, you're always saying, okay, what's happening outside? And then how can we bring that internal? And so, we did that one through M&A, but we also did partnerships. We also started investing in startups that were early just to partner with them, bring them along. Maybe they become acquisition targets, maybe they don't. But that was really the job. It's like bringing that innovation inside the four walls in different shapes and forms, and you kind of have those different tools. So I did that at Cisco for 7 years, did 20 plus acquisitions, 20 plus investments. Really enjoyed it. And then the whole gang from Responses had gotten back together at DocuSign, basically. And they said, hey, we'd love to come, have you join us. We want to do more on the M&A side. We want to launch a venture fund. And I was like, that sounds great. I would love to launch like a corporate venture fund, from the ground up. Like Cisco's had been longstanding. Went over there, did that for a bit. There was a little bit of turmoil at the time. It was kind of just as the COVID winds were coming out of sales, and there's a lot of leadership changes. So that was a shorter run than I had hoped for. And most recently joined Dropbox kind of out of the back of that. And so that's where I am today, leading the team here. We also launched a venture fund in the last 2 years, but it's been 2 years kind of in this seat.
I'd like to go back to one specific question in time where you were making the switch from natural resources to investment banking and then tech. A lot of people try to break into tech, right? And I think tech is an industry that's notoriously difficult to break into because it is complex. But more importantly, we use acronyms and we use phrases that are designed to keep people out of what we talk about. So I'm curious, was that your experience moving into tech? And how were some ways that you were able to kind of overcome that so that you could ingratiate yourself into the industry?
I mean, I think the first thing I did was I reached out, and, it kind of goes back to having a good network, right? I reached out to everybody I knew that was in tech, right? That was working in tech or was around tech. And so just started talking to them. And I think, sometimes it's humbling, but you have to say like, hey, listen, I'm an idiot. Like, I don't understand any of this, like this is all foreign to me, having worked in, a mining and oil and gas, and like, explain it to me. And you just keep having conversations, and you find you kind of start to build on it. You start to build that lingo, right? And so I'm grateful to all the people that took the time just to walk me through that, because end of the day, I wasn't adding much to them. They were adding to me, right? But that's kind of what you try and do, and you help people, and, what goes around comes around. So, anytime I can help somebody else out, I'm looking to do that. And then I think what helped too was, you always play to your strengths, right? So I was a finance person. And as I mentioned, the person that took me on inside of Jefferies was where I was at. Was very much like, hey, I have a harder time teaching markets to people than I do tech. And so like I leveraged my knowledge of markets to get into that industry. So I think that was really, leverage your strengths where you can and try to bridge them over. And then just use your network, talk to people. Even if it's just getting smarter, it'll serve you as you kind of get into the conversations where you need to show that knowledge.
I know you've been staying atop of all things AI as it relates to investments, but how do you see it impacting your job in the world of corporate development, the world of evaluating companies and having, just think about the concept of asymmetry of information, go back to our days and, sitting in Ramazani's, I can't remember which class, but he had a class I think we both took. And it was just like the world of finance and the world of data and technology is a far cry from those days in San Luis Obispo. So I'm just curious, like, what's your perspective? How's it going to change, your job and the folks that you work with?
I mean, it's interesting. It's still early days, but you think about it in different ways. So there's the sourcing piece that you mentioned. It's how do you find great companies? And there are platforms that claim to be doing more of that. And the hard part is when you're dealing with private companies, you still have a lot more imperfect information, right? Especially early stage private companies, because they don't want information getting out. It's like, hey, we're ramping great in this area of the market. If everybody hears that tomorrow, you have 10 more competitors that pop up, right? But there are platforms out there that are looking to do more. We don't use anything today, but it is something that constantly, like, I'm keeping my eye on. When I'm in an M&A process, there's a lot of AI tools that drive efficiency. And I think it's when you come down to those more mundane jobs, at least today, where you can really like remove a lot of that friction. So it's like, if I'm acquiring a company, usually there's a data room. It's full of contracts contracts. It's full of all the information that a company has down to their bylaws, their charters in there. And it's like you have to pay an army of lawyers to go in and like read all that stuff. Well, lawyers aren't cheap. Well, suddenly, if you can trust AI to summarize a lot of that or grab it or flag certain things, like that cuts down on your costs, right? And so there are solutions out there that are starting to do that. I don't think they're at the point where everybody's like, yeah, I'm 100% trustworthy that we're going to do that.
Yeah.
But I think in the near future, we will get there. Hopefully there won't someday be a AI corporate development person because I might be looking for a new job.
You always go back to natural resources, Donald.
Exactly. The robots can't do everything.
Yeah, they can't mine. Oh well, they could.
Maybe.
But someone's got to direct them where to mine.
As you think about corporate development and your approach to kind of rounding out Dropbox's or anybody's corporate strategy, are there certain starting points that you start at to say, these are the kinds of companies that we want to go after, or these are the investment objectives? We're either trying to increase our market share or trying to shore up our product. Like, how do you think about just where to start for something that is so broad as corporate development?
There's different strategies that you can pursue, right? One of the things that I like to think about is, what is your competitive differentiation? What are you good at? So, like, is that go to market? When I was at Cisco, as an example, like Cisco is known as kind of a go to market machines, particularly like with IT professionals. And so if that is your competitive differentiation, it's like, okay, well, can we put more products in the hands of those sellers that we have today to sell more, into our existing customers? Because it's much easier to sell, new things to old friends than it is to sell new things to new friends, as a wise salesperson once told me.
How do you think about acquire, invest versus partner equation? Where's the line where you say partner versus let's pay for it?
Yeah, it's the classic, especially in tech. It's like, do you build, do you buy, do you partner? That's usually the framework you hear a lot, right? And so where you build is usually like you already have the expertise. You have the engineers that can do it. And almost every engineer will tell you they can build something. I haven't met too many engineers that be like, I can't build that. They all believe they can build everything. So often that's not a easy argument to make that we don't have the talents. But it happens, right? Particularly as you have like big shifts like AI. But let's just say, okay, you can build everything. And that's always going to be the cheapest. So if you can build something, I think that's always the default. You want it to be native to your platform. So if you're building it, it's going to be native to your existing platform, most likely. And so that generally makes sense. Now, why do you get away from build, right? That should always be the default. Well, you need something faster than you can build it. So if you need something with speed, you can look at partner. That's probably the fastest, honestly. Like if you can find a good partner that already has a solution that works, go for that. Sometimes acquisition can be faster. It's often slower than people think. You think like, oh yeah, we'll just snap our fingers and acquire a company. Well, that usually takes like 6 to 9 months. And then, you have to integrate it, with your existing tech stack. But partner is usually like great for speed. It's also for things that you look at and you say, is this differentiated? Do I need to own this part of the stack, or is it already openly available in the marketplace? And if it's openly available, why do you rebuild something that already exists? As long as it's not prohibitively expensive, like go partner for that piece. And then one thing I would highlight is kind of to that point of like the attitude of we can build everything, is building the go-to-market for something is often really hard.
Perfect segue. And then I'm going to jump in with this question. What do you look for? What's your go-to-market checklist? Is it, do we have the right leader? Do we have the right sales process? Do we have the right tech stack? Do we have the right revenue operations supporting the leader? All of the above. And how do you prioritize down that list? Because as you mentioned, you're looking at hundreds, thousands of pieces of data and inputs, and they're not all equal, right?
No, I mean, it's important to get right, because I think that's where you can really screw up an acquisition too, is if the go-to-market doesn't work. And so it's interesting, like at Dropbox, for example, we're very much a PLG-led company. And so, our sales motion is very different than going back to like the Cisco example where you have enterprise, heavy sales. And so I have to kind of look at and say, okay, one, what is our thesis for this? Is this being integrated in? Is it being sold by our existing sellers? Well, if so, okay, is it the same sales motion, or do you need to change something? Cisco is a great example. If you have a huge sales force that's used to already operating a certain way, has a comp structure a certain way, if this new target, this new product isn't sold in that same way, it's probably not going to work. It's going to break, right? And so like, I find that all the time is like, you're not going to change behaviors, right? And systems and everything else. So I think you have to find things that are going to have a very similar motion, unless your thesis is this is going to be completely standalone, a whole new business. We're not going to extract a lot of synergies. Maybe it's a new platform and it's going to sit separate. But otherwise, like, you have to have that similarity. So like, Cisco for a long time, it was like we sold everything perpetual. When the SaaS revolution came, we kept trying to shove all these SaaS assets in, and it was so hard to get the comp structures, get the sellers to know how to sell SaaS. Like, there's just so much friction. So many of those failed because of that, right? And so you have to have that. And one little acquisition is not going to move the whole big mothership of what you already have going with, $40-50 billion of sales. And suddenly you have $100 million of sales over here that's sold a different way. Guess what? That's probably going to break and get forgotten.
I need to bring that up because part of the reason why we started this firm in the first place is because it's easy to come up with ideas in the boardroom. It's easy to align on the financial plan for what that's going to look like. It is extremely hard to turn a ship at all. Do you remember the Titanic? That thing couldn't move. And it's now try to get your entire Cisco sales force to change their behaviors. It's just a lot for anybody to take on while they're also trying to chase a quota.
Absolutely, 100%. So yeah, it's not easily done. And so I think generally, like, we've aligned the fact that if you're going to acquire something, it better fit in your existing motion.
Well, I think we are running out of time for this episode in chatting with you, Donald, about your career. But I have a feeling that a lot of the themes that we've spoken about today are going to come back again when we talk next week about some of the specific challenges that you've faced in your career.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in this week, and make sure to join us for next week's episode.